Welcome back to Big Dan's Airgun Review channel. Today we're going to be taking a look at, I think, one of the most underrated PCPs that BSA make, the BSA Scorpion. Now, as all of our reviews, we're going to be testing for accuracy, consistency, power, and generally the feel of the rifle when it's in the shoulder. So, let's crack on with the review and let's see what we think of the BSA Scorpion. So features, starting off at the rear, we have a rather nicely finished rubber recoil pad, as I'm sure you'd expect. As we come slightly further down, you can see there is a sling stud fitted as standard. In fact, as we pan across, you can obviously imagine there's also one on the front end as well. Now the one on the front you can use for a bipod or the as mentioned sling. As we come up a tad, you can see the cheek piece. Now it is a ambidextrous cheek piece. That being said, however, if you look from the rear, it does sort of more favour the right-handed shooter than the left, looking at the angle of the comb. That being said, I do know plenty of lefties that shoot these and have absolutely no issues at all with them. So lefties rejoice, kind of, I would say, on that one. It's perfectly usable, but it is ideally tailored to the right-handed shooter. Next up, and this bit's quite interesting, we move on to the grip. Now this bit's interesting because most synthetic stocks are made just to be tough and such like that. It's as long as you can get your hand around it, it's fine. But notice the sculpturing in the grip on the Scorpion, where you can shoot it either standard with your thumb going across, or they've even made it so as you can comfortably shoot with the thumb up position. You don't usually get that sort of texturing, shall we say, or effort put into a synthetic stock gun. But this is really, really nice, and I do like that, but we'll see how that feels when we get to the handling section. Next up we get to the safety, which is just above the trigger here, as you can see. Semi-basic unit, to be fair. Flick forwards to fire and flick it back to put it on safe, but we'll talk a bit more about that on the handling section. As we come down, you can also see the trigger. Now this is a standard blade, so no match type trigger on this. Again, some people will like that, some people might not. It is a two-stage adjustable unit. Again, we'll talk more about that when we get to the handling section. And unlike many modern rifles on the market today, whether it's budget or high-end, it uses a bolt, a good old-fashioned traditional bolt action, which I'm quite looking forward to having a play with when we get to the handling section. Next up we get to the scope rail. It is a dovetail rail on this, so the Picatinny Weaver fan club aren't going to be entertained by this, I'm sure. That being said, it is quite a clever system, this. We'll talk a bit more about that when we get to the handling section. Next up we get to the air cylinder. Now there's no regulator inside of this, and again, some people like regulators, some don't. We'll see how it performs when we get to the power and consistency testing of the video. One thing I'll mention is that I'm not the hugest fan of already is, guess where the pressure gauge is? Right underneath the barrel. Not a huge fan of that for obvious reasons, but sadly it's a case of it is what it is. Next up we move along to the barrel. Now this is interesting because BSA fit their rifles with their own cold hammer forged barrel. And we know how accurate cold hammer forged barrels really are due to what we've seen with the Comettas and such like that. So I have got very high hopes for the Scorpion here. So overall, features wise, the Scorpion is a really nice spec'd little gun. You do have the omission of a regulator, but at the same time, some unregulated guns are set up so well that you don't even need one most of the time. But we'll find out when we get to the consistency testing section. Overall, I think it's a really nicely spec'd gun, but that doesn't mean much if it's heavy as sin and is only doing about 4 foot-pound through the chronograph. So we're not going to say much until we get further on into the review. Before we get there though, let's have a little look at these magazines. Okay, so loading the mag, how is this? Well, it's actually really quite easy, possibly one of the easiest we've ever had on the channel. So you don't have to spin a rotor around and then sort of load your pellet ass backwards like some of them. Literally, all you want to do is get your pellet and then load it straight through the hole like so, and then use your finger to spin to the next pellet hole, and essentially rinse and repeat until it's done. One thing I will mention is make sure that you keep a little bit of pressure on the rotor with your finger, like you can see here, my index finger, because otherwise it can sort of slap back. But as soon as you load your pellet, look, it's in there pretty good. So nice and easy mags to load. With that said, let's get the rifle in the shoulder and let's see what we think of it. Okay, so handling, what do we think of the BSA Scorpion? Well, first thing I'm going to mention, there's a couple of little nitpicks that I've got. Number one, you'll see, obviously, as you can probably tell from earlier, this is the synthetic stock. the sort of checkering, stippling thing they've got going on the forestock, you can't feel it. It feels literally the exact same as the rest of the stock, sort of like that sort of textured, almost rough finish on your thumb. Now granted, that is to an extent a good thing, because it means the rest of the stock does feel really nice and it's got tons of grip basically all over it. But then why did you, it must just be a styling flair they've done. I can't feel that pretty much whatsoever over the rest of the stock. The other thing I need to mention though, which is a little bit naughty and I'm not the hugest fan of, but they're not the only gun company to do this, and you know what's coming. So first rule of shooting, never look down the barrel. How much air have I got in my gun? You see the problem? I don't like that. Next time, if you're watching this BSA, Crowll do it and such, put your pressure gauge in here somewhere, so you can see then what your pressure's doing without looking straight down the barrel of the gun. If you can, that would be much, much better. I don't like your pressure gauges up there. I don't care if it's a day state, an FX, whatever it is. Don't do it. It's, blech, don't like it. But onto the good news. This is a lovely gun to shoulder. Now granted, it's not quite perfect, say 50-50 weight distribution, if you can see that there. It is more, ever so slightly, microscopically on the front end, the weight. So if you're more used to a gun with the weight in your shoulder and such, I don't know, you might not be entirely comfortable with this. But speaking of comfort, what I will say, this stock, although it's only a synthetic, and most of the time, as we might have mentioned earlier, synthetic stocks don't really get the care and attention that the wood versions do. This is possibly the most comfortable synthetic stock that I've ever shouldered, and there's good reasons for that. The palm swell is an actual palm swell. It's not just, sometimes you just get like a slab coming down and that's pretty much it. Even with my big hands, I can get really comfortable with this gun. The cheek piece is absolutely gorgeous as well. It's almost like a cushion to put your cheek on here. Again, an area that a lot of guns, some of the cheaper guns, barely even bother with a comb. It just is flat almost. But you can see here how it protrudes out the top. And although we mentioned earlier it is mainly a right-hand shooter's gun, well, marginally, shall we say, even if you're left-handed, you're going to be right at home with this here. One thing I will mention though is, as you may have picked up earlier, it's a bolt action, not a side lever. So if you're shooting from prone, you might have a little bit more difficulty with it, but to be fair, I don't think that's ever really stopped anybody in the past, has it, with a bolt action gun? I've never heard people back in the day, or snipers, say, I can't cock this gun laying prone, my good man, it's a bolt. What I will mention, which is quite nice, is the magazine and the breech area on this gun. However, if there's children watching this, or if the missus is walking around, please go away, because it's going to sound like I'm talking about something completely different. By that, what I mean is, what is quite clever is these mags have what you could call a nipple sticking off the top, if you can see that. And these nipples essentially go in a hole. But it's smarter than that. That essentially will lock the mag in place, so you can't get any movement as you're cocking it, which some guns can do. There is a magnet inside the breech, and if you have a look, if I let go now, if you saw that then, my hand might have been in the way. The magnet essentially sucks the mag where it needs to be, and you could say it sucks the nipple in the hole. I'm going to get absolutely banned from YouTube for this one, I know. Sorry. So it could be the last episode of Big Dans you ever see. But yeah, it's a nice way of securely locking the mag in place, and then after that you simply just close the bolt and off she goes. So let's have a go now with the bolt action and get a feel of the trigger. So we've got a really nice, oh, safety off first. It nearly caught me out then, do you see that? Right then, so really nice first stage. Then you get the second. Let's give that a little squeeze. A little bit of creep. Did you see that then? And then it goes. There's a microscopic little bit of creep in there, but I'm sure we might be able to adjust that out a bit later on. So let's give that a cycle. A little bit stiff loading that pellet in, but we are using H&N FTTs, which are quite solid. Let's give that another go. Second. Let's see, was it just a random bit of creep, or is it in the action? Nope, we got creep again. It's microscopic though, if you can see that. And the trigger pull itself is lovely. Do you know what, I do miss bolt actions. Right, so second, you can see that there. Boom, see that creep? Off it goes. That is a nice trigger, but I think it just needs a little bit of fine tuning. It's not enough creep to really be a problem, but it is definitely enough that it's worth mentioning, essentially, especially hopefully if you can see it on camera then. Overall, handling-wise... Oh, and there's another thing I like about this. See, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's whack that safety back on. The other thing I like about this gun is, if you can see that, the rail on here. Whereas most guns, or the, say, PCPs I should say, they'll have the magazine sticking out the top. The way they've designed the block on this, the mag slides in, as you can see, from the left to right, but it means you've got a complete long, uninterrupted dovetail rail on the top. Because of this, you can place your scope basically wherever you want on this pretty healthy rail, it must be said, and not have to worry about the scope bottoming out on the mag or anything like that. It's a silly little thing, but again, I like that. It gives you freedom to set the scope and not make you go, oh bloody hell, I've got to use taller mounts on this or something along those lines. But overall, it's a really nicely set up gun, barring, like I say, the stippling, which is a bit odd, and the pressure gauge, which really shouldn't be there. But that being said, it's all praises at the minute. But how is it through the chronograph? Well, let's whack it out and find out. Okay, so we've shortened up the first stage and lightened up the second stage. So you can see this now. That's second. And now we're going to keep pulling. And that broke there, if you could see that, at about 0.52, I believe, or 5.2 ounces, roughly around that mark. So a massive improvement over how it was to begin with, and it was already nice to start with, to be fair. We've just sharpened it up that little bit. So we can confirm you can get a really nice little trigger out of this gun. Okay, so 27 yards accuracy testing time. There's a tiny little bit of wind, not really enough, I don't think, to throw a 2-2 off or anything like that. We've got the target set up. The rifle is going to be shot off of a rest, or our little beanbag sort of rest that we use, and we're going to be doing 5-shot groups at our 27 yard marker. Got a few different pellets on test. We're going to, obviously, to keep the video short as we can, we'll pick the best ones from testing and then move on with that. And let's see how she gets on. We've got everything from JSB to Marksman, so this should be fun. And to those thinking that 27-yard group might have been a fluke, I then decided to do it again. Now how's that for impressive? The Superfields gave us one flyer as expected when it's me shooting, of course, but we still ended up with a group measuring out at just over ½ inch. With the flyer eliminated, however, the group stands at only 0.34 of an inch. The H&Ns did even better with no flyers at all and a group size of only 0.37 of an inch. That's some wickedly impressive accuracy on show there, but 27 yards isn't exactly a million miles away. So let's push this to 45 yards with the H&Ns and see how it does there. And with the 45-yard test well and truly done, we'll save the results for the final verdict. So, what do we think of the little BSA Scorpion? I think you already know what I think of this little gun. I absolutely love it. So, final verdict, and what do we think of the BSA Scorpion? Well, before I potentially gush over it, let's get the negatives out of the way first. As we always say, no rifle is perfect. Number one, the pressure gauge is of course in a stupid place and needs moving. If you're anti-bolt action for whatever reason, this rifle also won't be for you. Due to the breech design, you also can't thumb load pellets, so you'll need a single shot tray. And although I love the stock design, the stippling on the forestock is more for looks than actual grip. I would mention the slightly creepy trigger, but as you can see, we tweaked that out of there with just the adjustment screws. So do we recommend the rifle, and do I like the rifle? The performance on offer matches or exceeds that of rifles twice the price. I'm willing to guarantee that anyone with a HW100 or even an S410 would be seriously chuffed with the results. The reason I say this is because that group we had at 45 yards wasn't just impressive, it was seriously impressive. That's 0.46 of an inch at 45 yards in outdoor conditions, from a rifle that can be bought new for around £500. On paper, the only advantage something like a HW100 has is the regulator, but considering the shot count which already rivals that of most cylinder-fed regulated PCPs, and consistency that may be even better than a fair chunk of them, do you even need one? I'm not so sure. The rifle also handles brilliantly, perhaps mildly nose heavy, but a lot of that will depend on the scope mounted, but other than this, it shoulders superbly and has one of the best grips I've ever felt, especially on a synthetic stock. I'd genuinely be stunned if I fell in love with the R10 or R12 as much as I have done this little Scorpion. I think the only PCP that can rival it for me at the moment is the Reximex Pretensis. Overall, I think the Scorpion is an absolute little hidden gem that deserves way more respect than it gets. It's the Porsche Cayman of the airgun world. It might not be as flashy as the 911, but it's every bit as good to drive, if not better. Anyways, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.